After her husband's death, Sarah Winchester, heir to the Winchester rifle fortune, believed she was cursed by the spirits of those killed by the family's rifles. To appease them, she began continuous construction on her mansion in 1884, a project that lasted 38 years until her death in 1922. The house grew into a labyrinth of twisting hallways, staircases leading to nowhere, doors that opened into walls, and windows that looked into other rooms. The chaotic layout was meant to confuse and trap vengeful spirits she believed were haunting her. Many visitors and employees report strange phenomena in the house, including footsteps echoing in empty hallways, mysterious cold spots, and sightings of a spectral figure believed to be Sarah herself, wandering the halls. Some claim to hear her distant organ playing at night, or to see lights flickering in rooms that have no electricity. Jackson Gray was a skeptic by nature. A documentary filmmaker with a strong distaste for the supernatural, he was used to debunking ghost stories and exploring supposedly haunted locations with a calm, critical eye. The Winchester Mystery House seemed like the perfect challenge. After all, it was world famous for its bizarre architecture and Sarah Winchester's supposed curse. So when he was offered a private tour for his next project, he eagerly agreed. Jackson arrived at the house late in the evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The tour guide, a young woman named Lila, was polite, but unusually reserved as she led him through the mansion's twisting hallways and into rooms filled with strange, antique furniture. Shadows clung to the corners as their footsteps echoed against the impossibly high ceilings. The house was under construction for 38 years, Lila explained, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah Winchester believed it would keep the spirits away. Miss Winchester thought the house had a mind of its own, Lila continued, like it was shifting, hiding things from her. Jackson chuckled, his laughter swallowed up by the cavernous silence. But as he panned his camera over the darkened hallways, he felt something odd, a prickle at the back of his neck. It was as if the house were watching him, waiting. They reached the séance room, one of the most famous places in the house. Jackson snapped pictures of the small, windowless room as Lila explained its history. "This is where she spoke to the spirits every night," Lila whispered. "She would lock herself in for hours. Some say she was given instructions on how to build the house. They say she could hear voices telling her what to add next." Jackson's skepticism wavered, just a little. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with something he couldn't quite place. Then a soft noise echoed down the hallway. It was faint, barely perceptible, a dragging sound like fabric brushing against the floor. Jackson glanced at Lila, but she was frozen, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" he asked, heart pounding. Lila nodded, her voice a tense whisper. "That's not supposed to happen." The sound grew louder, moving toward them, echoing off the narrow walls. The hairs on Jackson's arm stood up as he strained his ears, his eyes locked on the dark hallway. The dragging sound seemed to loop, like someone endlessly pacing back and forth. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. In that brief, stuttering glow, Jackson saw a figure. A woman in a dark, tattered dress, her hair tangled around her face. She was at the end of the hallway, her eyes dark and hollow, staring directly at him. Jackson blinked, but she was gone. The light returned, the hallway empty. He wanted to call out, but something in his throat seized, silencing him. Lila, wide-eyed, grabbed his arm. "We need to go, now." They hurried back through the twisting corridors, but the layout had changed. Hallways led to different rooms. Doors were locked that had been open moments before. Panic set in as Jackson realized they were trapped in a house that seemed to shift, closing in on them. The dragging sound returned, closer this time, as if the figure were following them, just beyond their sight. Finally, after what felt like hours, they stumbled out of the house, the night air chilling their skin. Jackson glanced back, his camera still recording, and saw a single light flickering in the seance room window. The dark figure stood there, watching. That night, Jackson reviewed the footage, convinced it would show nothing. But as he watched, his heart dropped. Every hallway, every room they'd filmed, contained her, a shadow, a face, a hand just out of sight, haunting every frame. Lena Myers was a historian fascinated with the occult, and the Winchester Mystery House was her holy grail. She'd been granted access to some of the more restricted areas of the mansion to research Sarah Winchester's construction plans and diary entries. It was rumored that the blueprints held hidden codes, mysterious symbols scattered across the sketches, which no one had been able to decipher. One night, alone in the sprawling attic, Lena combed through dusty, brittle blueprints under a dim light. She traced the lines of the strange symbols, shapes that seemed almost to move beneath her fingers. As she worked, a soft whisper brushed against her ear, so faint she almost missed it. "Lena." She froze, looking around the empty room. The attic was silent, filled only with the musty scent of old wood and paper. She took a steadying breath and returned to her work. A few minutes later, the whisper returned, louder this time, chilling her to the bone. "Lena!" This time it was unmistakable. A woman's voice, as clear as if someone were leaning close, yet there was no one there. She stumbled back, her heart pounding. The shadows seemed to shift, darkening in the corners of the room. The walls, thick with dust and age, appeared to throb, almost as if they were breathing. A cold wind swept through the attic, and Lena's papers scattered. She bent down to gather them, only to freeze as the whisper returned, more insistent, a voice both sorrowful and accusing. "Help me." Lena's hands trembled as she gathered the papers. Her eyes caught on a single sheet, an old blueprint she hadn't noticed before. It depicted a hidden room, walled off behind one of the grand staircases. In the center of the room was a symbol she recognized from her research, a protection sigil used in seances. Drawn by a strange compulsion, Lena made her way down to the main staircase, flashlight in hand. She pressed along the wall where the blueprint indicated, her fingers catching on a hidden latch. The wall shifted, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Inside the hidden room, she found an old chair and a series of candles burned down to stubs. The air was thick, as if she'd entered a place where time had stopped. But what struck her most was the feeling of a presence, something lingering just out of sight. A chilling voice filled the room, as if emerging from the walls themselves. "She trapped us here. She wouldn't let us go." The voice was followed by another, and then another, layered whispers, overlapping, filling the room until they became a cacophony of pain and anger. Lena clapped her hands over her ears, but the voices grew louder, each one pressing against her mind with terrifying clarity. She stumbled back, tripping over the doorway as the voices grew louder still, each word hammering into her brain like an echo. "Free us! Free us!" Desperate, she slammed the hidden door shut, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed her, growing quieter, only to surge louder every few steps, like footsteps stalking her through the hallways. By the time she reached the exit, her hands were shaking, her mind reeling. Lena never returned to the house. But at night, she could still hear the whispers, soft, pleading, echoing from the walls of her own home, calling her name in Sarah Winchester's sorrowful voice, as if waiting for her to return and set them free.